What's going on, Wolfpack Nation? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tuffy Talk, and I'm excited about this one. I make no bare bones about it. Baseball is my favorite sport, and it is that time of the year. It is NCAA college baseball. The road to Omaha starts this weekend, and it starts in Raleigh for the Pac-9. But we wanted to bring on a couple of guys that know baseball, and so we got Nicholas and Micah from College Baseball Central joining us tonight. Fellas, how are we doing?
Doing great, guys. I've been following y'all since undergrad, so it's pretty surreal to be on with you and talk ball. Can't wait to get this started.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. Micah, how are we doing tonight, buddy?
I'm good. I'm hoping my Wi-Fi wants to actually work for you guys because for some odd reason it doesn't want to work. I don't know if maybe this is karma for all the times NC State's beaten Virginia in the past calendar year. My internet doesn't want to work for an NC State podcast.
All right. We'll get you through this. You're wearing an NC State hat, so hopefully that NC State stuff doesn't happen to you tonight, as we're famously known for. But I want to jump right into it because I want to talk from an ACC perspective before we get into that Raleigh Regional. And kind of did the committee get it right for ACC schools as far as like hosting, not hosting, seeding? Kind of give me your thoughts first, Micah.
I mean, I think there's definitely some pairings that don't seem fair. North Carolina, of course, getting LSU and also what I deem a very dangerous Wofford team is not very fair for a number 4 national seed. But, for the most part, I didn't think it was that bad. Obviously, the committee sent a message saying the SEC and the ACC, you're going to figure it out on the field. So it's going to be interesting, obviously. Not a huge fan of necessarily some of these pairings that the out west schools got. A little, I think, not home cooking, but I don't understand why Oregon State's getting a much lesser opponent than the number 4 national seed, but as their 2. But at the same time, you know what? If we want to be the best conference of college baseball, we got to go out and prove it. So that's kind of my thought on it.
Absolutely. Nicholas, I'm going to take it a different way. Duke ECU, who got the Rob job?
I think Duke definitely got the Rob job. I think winning the second best conference tournament should be deserving for a national seed, or not a national seed, but at least top 16 seed. I think though, Mike and I discussed this yesterday on College Baseball Central last night. I think it kind of worked out for Duke a little bit where ECU will be playing Wake Forest and a very low seed, and Wake is a very dangerous team. And if you're Duke, you're kind of benefiting of playing one of the more overrated regional hosts in Oklahoma. I've got Duke coming out of that regional. So it's either Duke, do you want to be a 15 or 16 seed and play a very dangerous 2 that could have been like a LSU, a Vandy, or do you want to go on the road and play probably an overrated regional host? So that's kind of what we figured out. Although I still think they should have hosted. They did. I mean, Duke had an unbelievable season. Going 4-0 in this conference tournament is a very hard thing to do. And another thing that I pointed out last night was when Duke started, before the tournament started, Duke's RPI was 22. They moved up, I think, 7 spots. And that's where ECU was before their tournament started. And they flip-flopped. So that should have told you that, okay, Duke's going to host. ECU is going to be a high 2 seed. And well, that did not happen. So
right. Yeah, I agree with that assessment there. Micah, do you make anything of the ACC getting all SEC hosts as number 2s and the SEC not getting a Power 5 in their regions?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, again, it just goes back to the ACC teams they're not national seeds, right? There's 2 of them that are, and those 2 are a little confusing on why they got what they got. But I understood that like a Virginia guy here. I understand the Mississippi State coming to town makes sense. Like you got the SEC teams are in that 20 to 24 range. Makes sense for Virginia to be getting one. It kind of makes sense even for national seed with Florida State at 8 to get one. But some of these just don't make as much sense to me. Again, I think Clemson drawing Vandy, I don't think is that unreasonable. I know NC State fans initially didn't want to see Vandy, right? But I don't think that's too fair. But I don't think it's too ridiculous, right? Like Vandy was a team that almost missed the tournament. So
right. Were you shocked that South Carolina didn't go to Clemson and they ended up coming to States, given last year we played them in South Carolina?
I wasn't. No, I mean, I don't think they want to set that type of precedent with these rivalries as much as if they can avoid it. Especially when it's a 1-2. Like obviously Georgia Tech's going to Georgia, but that's a 1-3, so that one makes a little bit more sense in my opinion than, let's say, again, the 1-2 being the two top dogs in the state of South Carolina.
Yeah. Nicholas, give me the ACC team that has the easiest path to supers and the team that has the hardest path to super regionals.
Ooh, good question. Hardest path, I want to say, is Wake. Going to the jungle is very hard. As I mentioned a few days ago, Wake has never been, I don't think Wake's been at ECU, at least in a very long time. You see all these other North Carolina schools going to the jungle, State, UNC, Duke, hell, even Wilmington, Campbell, they're all going to ECU. Wake does not. So that's a challenge in itself. And then they've got Tennessee potentially waiting for them in Knoxville. While the storyline there is Chase Burns returns back to Tennessee, that would be great and all. But when you're that theoretical 17th seed and you go to the number 1 overall seed, it's a tough path. I also think UNC has a tough path too. I mean, just their regional alone is tough with LSU. I know I'm a state guy, but I can't admit that UNC got a little hosed there. So I kind of agree with Micah on that. I think the easiest path, though, I love Duke's. I love Duke's regional so much that I think they can go 3-0 and then make a run to supers. They haven't yet, and I think this is one of Duke's better teams that Pollock has had. So I think they have a good shot at getting through supers.
What about you, Micah? Do you agree with that? Or do you have any other teams that have an easy path or a tough path?
I think the easiest path might be for your Wolfpack. I don't think your regional is all that difficult. I'm not super sold on South Carolina. They're a team that has a tendency to just watch strike 3, and yeah, they had a little run there in in Hoover, but there's nothing too special about them, in my opinion. They've had their struggles this year. Their pitching staff has got a lot of question marks. James Madison, in my opinion, shouldn't have been in. So I think that gives you a little bit of a benefit. Now they're going to have a chip on their shoulder, and they're a decent ball club. I'm not trying to say that everyone in the tournament has to be pretty good, right?
Sure.
But they're not. I think they're one of the easier 3 seeds in the tournament. And then again, you talk about Bryant. Like Bryant can hit the living daylights out of the baseball, but they can't pitch. So like that could be an easy 17-7 win for the Wolfpack, and you're a little scared about the pitching staff, but I mean they average 10 runs a game for a reason. They're pretty good offensively. So I think that might be the easiest. And the most difficult for me is North Carolina, because I don't think people are talking enough about Wofford. Their RPI is 46. Again, I have a Southern Conference tie, so I'm obviously a little biased, but they are a very senior-led team too, with arguably one of the best pitchers in college baseball. Like the LSU Wofford game on Friday, Kendall Rogers even said that's his most excited he is for a single pitching matchup in all of Friday in the regionals. So you've got 2 guys that are really, really good going head to head. And so Wofford could be one of those teams where, again, I don't think North Carolina is going to drop their first game, but Wofford could be that team that eliminates a North Carolina or an LSU, in that, elimination game 1-1 record.
Yeah. Michael, you got anything ACC related before we jump into anything else?
No,
on that, I think that UNC, like Michael was saying, it's I don't understand how that you can give that put that LSU team there for the number 1 ACC team. I mean, I think that's definitely the toughest. And yeah, I like Duke as well. They got to travel, but like Nicholas was saying, it's kind of an advantageous matchup, even with the travel.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I think you guys were talking about it last night that I think it was Monty. I think at first was sleeping on the Tallahassee regional. and you were talking up Stetson pretty good there, Micah, and UCF. Actually, it was more UCF that you were talking up last night, and I agree. We have Stetson went and beat Florida State this year. I think they beat Florida as well, but I think pretty much everyone beat Florida this year, and yet they still made the tournament. But that's a talk for another day. But I think that Tallahassee one's sneaky good. But I still think Florida State probably prevails in that. I don't, especially you're throwing Jamie Arnold out there. Well, I guess that was the question you guys were talking about. Like, does Jamie Arnold go out Friday night against Stetson? And, that'll be interesting. And I think that's the one thing that, how serious are these teams going to take these 3 and 4 seed teams? Are they going to throw out your aces? And, that kind of just sets the tone for the weekend. Kind of what is your philosophy? Anyone that wants to take it, throwing out your ace against quote unquote lesser competition.
I think for me, it boils down to knowing your roster. I'm a Virginia guy. Brian O'Connor believes in just sticking to his schedule. He doesn't care who's in front, no pun intended there, but he doesn't really worry about, what the matchups are. He wants to stick to his schedule. He trusts all of his guys. This year, it's a little bit different. I think there's a lot of a drop off from the 3rd starter to the 1 starter for Virginia, where a lot of years are kind of interchangeable. But my strategy would be to do your best matchup. Again, for example, for Florida State, I'm not throwing Jamie Arnold against Stetson. I'm just not, because, I'm a big believer that in tournament play, you cannot lose your second game. Because if you lose your first game and you lose your second game, you're going home. If you lose game 1 and you win game 1 and then lose game 2, then you're in an elimination game the next day and you've got to figure it out. So I've always said save your best for game 2. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've always said save your best for game 2. That's been my belief in any sort of double elimination process, is save your best for game 2, because if you win game 1, then you're putting yourself in the driver's seat. And if you lose game 1, then you've got your best guy going to keep your season alive.
Couldn't agree more with that philosophy, and we'll definitely talk about that when we break down the NC State matchup here in just a few minutes. But speaking of the NC State Regional, the Raleigh Regional gets started Friday afternoon. I think it's at 2:00 if I'm not mistaken. That'll feature JMU and South Carolina. You look at this matchup, and, obviously a Power 5, Group of 5. But you kind of talked about it. South Carolina is a team that made a little noise last week in Hoover. They kind of ran out of gas there in the last couple of games, basically beating themselves, committing, I think, 10 errors in the last 2 games of that tournament. And it's a team that can hit the living daylights. They could strike out or they could walk. It's just a really weird team. Kind of give me your thoughts, Nicholas, on the South Carolina team first, and then we'll start breaking down JMU.
Before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about our sponsor, Flightland's Jessup Insurance Group, that has your whole world covered, with agents in 5 offices throughout eastern North Carolina to help you decide how much coverage you need, offering policies for home and auto, recreational vehicles, commercial, crop, health, life, and employee benefits. They are able to combine options to find a comprehensive solution that works for you. Flightland's Jessup protects the things you love so you can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying them. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Flightlands Jessup. You can also visit their webpage at www.flightlandsjessup.com. So please make sure to go and check them out.
They were always just kind of there this year in the SEC in terms of the standings, in terms of the top 25. We do a top 25 for College Baseball Central every week. And it seemed like they were always lower for me. They would have a series where they would get high. I think there was 1 week this season where I didn't have them ranked at all. They're a very hot and very cold team, depending on who they play. I mean, they could wake up tomorrow and I could see them taking 2 or 3 out from Tennessee, but they could wake up the next day and lose 2 or 3 to Auburn, who didn't even make their own conference tournament. The pitching's been good, and then it's been not. The bats have been cold, then they've been hot. It's a very mishmash of what South Carolina has had this season. So I wouldn't be surprised if they lost the first game to JMU. But if I were a betting man, I would pick South Carolina to win this because, as Micah said, they were a bubble team. Probably shouldn't have been in. Maybe should have. It's all up for debate, but it's a sneaky good matchup for both teams, I think.
Yeah, before I go over to you, Michael, let me just break down some numbers. I meant to do that before we got into the conversation. You have South Carolina, which is 36-23, and to your point, Nicholas, 16-19 in the conference. Their RPI was 21st. Their strength of schedule was 8th in the country, so that definitely, the SEC will pump that number up. They finished 21st in the RPI, and JMU was 34-23, 19-15 in their conference play, which I believe is the CAA? Is that what? No, Sun Belt. Sunbelt, yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking about their old school days when they used to be in the Colonial. I forgot all those teams have switched around a lot, but in the Sunbelt, Fun Belt, like I said, 34-23, 19-15 in the conference. RPI is that 44, right? So that's that bubble number that you were talking about earlier, Micah. And their strength of schedule is 41, so that will put you on the bubble pretty much every single time. So with those numbers being said, and we can break down some deeper numbers as we get into the conversation, but kind of just give me your first thoughts on this matchup, Micah.
So, for South Carolina, their biggest thing to me is their plate discipline is a blessing and a curse. They walk a lot, but they also strike out a lot. They watch a lot of strike threes because they are just determined to get on base any way possible. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a team. There's 330 some college baseball teams, and South Carolina is 292nd in strikeouts percentage, but then they're 4th in the country in walk percentage. I mean, that is insane, a contrast. That is just crazy. It's an insane contrast.
And as a team, they only bat 275, so they're not like, hitting the tar Correct. Off the ball. Whereas, they are the lowest hitting team in this regional at 275. And their home run, like they've had 94 home runs, which is decent, 36 in the NCAA, and they're led by their catcher, Cole Messina, which is probably going to be a first round. Well, he's going to be a first round draft pick. Let's be real about that. So just kind of like you have a team, like both of these teams hit decent. Are you giving the pitching edge to South Carolina in this one then? Ideally as a state fan, we want this game to go 15 innings.
Yeah, ideally, yes. I would like that to go 15 innings. I don't know who they're going to throw. I mean, obviously, I think you got to go with your ace, but it's going to be a tough road for South Carolina. Like the way I feel about South Carolina is kind of how I felt about NC State last year in Columbia, where we got to win game 1 and then we'll be sitting okay. But game 2, how's that depth? How's that hitting discipline? All of that. Because I remember last year with State, it was a lot of not being clutch. I think this team's a lot more clutch this year. So we'll see what happens. But it's interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
So the interesting thing is when you're the host gets to pick which game they want to play, right? The early or the late game.
Yep.
So when and I've seen some teams that have been picking the early game, which it doesn't really make sense to me because who you can see who the other teams are gonna pitch before your game, so you can kind of build your pitching decisions off that too.
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely disadvantages and advantages, right? You get to scout the team a little bit before you can see them in person, how they play in your ballpark, right? You don't necessarily have that, but we're talking about pitching again. To your point, Nicholas, is it going to be Eli Jones? Is that going to be the dude for South Carolina who's thrown the most innings for them? Starting appearing in 16 games, starting 14, or do you go with I just saw his name here. Give me a second. Like an Eddie Cooper, who started 7 games. Is that your guy? Roman Kimball, is that your guy? It's going to be interesting to see, like Micah was saying earlier, is like, what approach are you going to take from a pitching? Are you going to throw your ace number 2? That's, to me, that's kind of where I'm at, because you flip into the JMU side of it. their best player is probably arguably their catcher, and Jason Scavone, He's got 18 home runs on the season and is batting 277 on the season. So you got guys that can hit. South Carolina's leading guy is what is that guy's name? It might be the catcher, or it might be that Ethan Petrie guy. I have to look it up, but kind of give me your thoughts on JMU from a hitting perspective.
I haven't paid too much attention about JMU. All I've known is that they've been kind of higher up in the Sun Belt this year. To me, the Sun Belt has been I want to say the fourth best conference behind the SEC, ACC, and probably throwing the Big 12 right there. They've had a good season. They've done really well being in this new conference, and which is can be a very tough conference for a school that's joining it. So if Micah could probably elaborate a little bit more. Hey, buddy, Micah could probably elaborate a little bit more on JMU. So.
Yeah, it looks like either Donovan Burke or Max Kuhl is probably the guy that they're going to probably throw on Friday. Do you have anything on either of those guys?
So I watched this entire rotation earlier this year. They came to East Tennessee State. For those of you that don't know, that is my full-time job. I work in athletics at East Tennessee State.
Gotcha.
So I watched JMU a lot this year, and this team is good, right? I didn't see anything that made me think that this was a team that I was like, oh man, the NCAA tournament team. When again we played them beginning of March, so they've obviously done some development. Some guys have gotten hurt, some guys have gotten healthy from early season injuries. Sure. The one thing that I learned about JMU is that they can jump on you early. And they're a big part of their approach when it comes to the offensive side of the ball is, again, like you look at their average, they have the best average coming into this regional because they just put the ball in play. They're not a big power team, right? Like you look at their home run numbers, like 84 is a very just kind of average number, right? For what you would deem
62.
Yeah, with a regional team. And they don't walk a lot, right? That's one thing I noticed is they will swing at balls. So if you guys, again, I think with the way the pitching staff is set up for NC State, right, we see some guys with some really nasty off-speed stuff. That's going to be beneficial against them. But, they also don't really get on base a lot, right? Again, going back to the walk thing, like they put the ball in play, and that's kind of their thing. They're not really necessarily looking for walks. So it'll be interesting to see what you get from them from that standpoint. And then obviously from the pitching side, I mean, they're a quality Sun Belt staff. But again, we're talking about the difference. Like their staff does not compare to, in my opinion, the two that we have with South Carolina and NC State.
Yeah. To your point, I just throw out a couple of stats here, and we can talk about them. You talked about the walk rate is 174th in the country at almost 11%. Their K rate is 17.8%, which is the second lowest in this regional. The average, like you said, 300. That's a team that hits 300. That's a good solid number. Their power numbers aren't bad, but they're not going to wow you. So I guess we'll end this first episode. You each give me a prediction on who wins the South Carolina JMU game, and I'll go with you first, Nicholas.
I feel really good about South Carolina just taking care of business. Like I said earlier, this South Carolina team reminds me of the state team in the Columbia Regional last year. Take care of game one and just hope for the best game two. I think just based on talent, I think South Carolina can just take care of the inferior opponent. So we'll see.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with you. Micah, you got a prediction for this one?
I'm on the other side of it. I lean James Madison. I think that one thing that I've been really feeling when it comes to looking at the bracket in general is a lot of these at-large teams, or, for example, like a UNC Wilmington and Athens, that have there's some outside noise behind them and their conference, right? Everyone was complaining about Coastal Carolina and James Madison getting in from the Sun Belt. Obviously for UNCW was the CAA only had one bid, Charleston getting left out, Northeastern getting left out. So playing for a little bit more than just your school, your team, playing for your conference. I think there's going to be. I'm not saying that James Madison's going to be playing in the regional final with NC State, but you're telling me in just game one alone, I think there's just going to be this added element, and there just seems to be too a lot of conversation of everyone's just assuming it's going to be the SEC, ACC teams in those 1-0 games, and I'm trying to pump the brakes a little bit because, again, James Madison's in the field for a reason. So I'm leaning the Dukes on this one. I think they're hungry, and I think they might catch South Carolina in a little bit of a sleepy kind of state. Plus, I mean, I'm assuming every NC State fan in the ballpark is going to be cheering for the team in purple for game one. So
yeah, agreed. Just some, Mike Mancini from JMU's got 29 stolen bases. That could play. When you're batting 300 and don't have a lot of power numbers, it sounds like you probably play a lot of small ball, hit and run type things, and just good sound fundamental baseball. Their catcher, and I'll wrap this up here. This is a regional with really good catchers. with Cozart and the guy from I just talked about him, Messina. Cole Messia, and then this what was his name? I just lost it up here. Jason Scavone. Am I saying that right, Micah? Scavone?
I think so.
Chavone?
I'm pretty sure that's how that was said.
Yeah. So that's going to be something fun to watch for this regional is really good catcher play. And hopefully, it works on both on the defensive end. Michael, give me a prediction for JMU and South Carolina. What are you thinking here? How's this one going to play out?
Yeah, I'll go South Carolina. But, to Micah's point, I mean, we see it every year and in different sports, not just baseball. You see it a lot in basketball. One of those last four teams that gets in makes a little run, just because, a lot of people had them out. A lot of people didn't think they should have been in. So they have a little extra motivation than your normal at-large team. So I wouldn't be surprised to see JMU win, but yeah, I'll go South Carolina.
One key, I guess, stat or whatever is that South Carolina's first baseman probably is not going to play in this. Some of the things that I'm seeing and reading, Gavin Cassis, transferred from Vanderbilt. He had his hand in a wrist brace thing. I think he got hit by a pitch in the SEC tournament. This guy that bats .260, has 10 home runs, and a guy that's playing first base, that's a pretty pivotal position. So, who are you bringing in? And is it someone that, you can trust and, won't, have errors, or, how good is he at picking balls? That could be something that, will play here in this regional. But Micah, I'm kind of leaning with you. I kind of want to go JMU. I think that, we talked about it a little bit ago with the errors that South Carolina has. If you're a team that hits 300, you're putting the ball in play, and if you're putting the ball in play and putting pressure on the defense, that could lead to some problems. So if JMU goes out and does their thing and puts it in play and puts the pressure on South Carolina, I think with that one guy's speed that I mentioned, it could be a long day for South Carolina, and I wouldn't be mad at that.
Yeah, and Mike Massini, the guy you're talking about, I got to watch him this summer. Him and Hollis Fanning on NC State were Kingsport Axemen. That's a team I live in Kingsport, Tennessee, so got to watch them a lot this summer. Mike's big thing too, he's really, really good at laying down a bunt. So if he leads off, sometimes we'll put him in the 8 hole, depending on where he's at. If there's somebody on base, you can almost guarantee he's moving a runner over. And because of his speed, he has, like, you look at his numbers, he has a ton of singles. And then if you look deep into the box score, they're bunt hits, or he beats out a chopper to the shortstop. So like you said, they're putting the ball in play. I mean, when they played us at ETSU, I called it death by 1,000 paper cuts. They weren't smacking the ball out of the park. It was a single, a double, a stolen base, a throwing error on us because we're trying to pick them off at third base. Like those types of small things that, like you said, South Carolina commits a lot of errors. It's something that can, like, that's where JMU will benefit, is if you will get, like, they will take advantage of your free gifts.
Right. Right. So, all right. So we got 2 South Carolinas and a JMU. So we'll wrap there. We'll get into the other side of the bracket here on the next episode, talk NC State and kind of talk how we see this bracket playing out. But as always, Wolfpack Nation, we appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed and hitting all those bells and whistles and notifications so you can get all these great podcasts. And make sure you go check out my guys, Nicholas and Micah, on all their stuff, and we'll put all their superlatives in the details and when we release this. But all right, Wolfpack Nation, let's stay tuned for episode number 2, and as always, go Pack.